Act 388 actually resulted in a huge financial windfall for Beaufort County. Because one of the things that it did, what it did was it raised the sales tax from 5% to 6%, and that raised about $1 billion. And that $1 billion was intended to hold local governments harmless for their inability to no longer tax 4% properties for school operating costs. And so that $1 billion was then allocated down to the local government based upon the revenues that they had to forego because of Act 388. Now, Beaufort County, because it didn't get much money or any money really under EFA, had to rely more heavily on property taxes. And so when you took away Beaufort County's ability to tax 4% properties, and then the state then made them harmless, held them harmless, we got relatively more money than other areas because we were leaning more heavily on that. And so the challenge there is, in regard to Act 388, so-called Tier 3 reimbursements, is what they call it up in the General Assembly, is the amount of that reimbursement stream is static. It's based upon the universe of 4% properties that existed in 2008. And so the amount that's being paid each year in those Tier 3 reimbursements are based on the number of 4% properties that the counties had to forego levying upon back then. Since then, we have seen the 4% properties increase, not only because of new construction, but primarily because 6% properties have migrated and become 4% properties. Because the tax savings are so great, they're much more aggressive in terms of declaring to the assessor, yes, this is my primary residence. Because you're talking in some cases about $10,000, $12,000, $14,000. And it's one of the things that I have on here in terms of addressing infrastructure needs. We definitely need to get more money into that. There's no question about that the grid is deferred maintenance is huge. But you got to have coupled with that. If you can't just look at the revenue side, you've got to look at the expenditure side. And if we're going to go ahead and increase revenues going into DOT for infrastructure, which I think we should, you need to couple that with an obligation that those dollars be expended in a manner that's rationally based, and that doesn't just go simply to where the most powerful legislators reside. And if you look at whether it's the State Infrastructure Bank or DOT appropriations, it wouldn't surprise anybody that about 60 to 65% of it overall over the past 10 years has gone to Charleston. You've had the Speaker of the House from Charleston for years. You had the President pro tem from Charleston. I mean, and those are the two most powerful people, frankly, in South Carolina government. I mean, even more so than the governor. We're at a point now with per capita funding for K through 12. If you look at EFA, on EIA, and the Tier 3 reimbursements, we're probably in the 30th or 40th percentile in terms of state per capita funding. We're no longer last. We're no longer at the bottom. And I can accept the fact that we're never going to be in the upper tier because of the reasons I've said. I mean, it's equitable for rural areas to receive more state money than Beaufort County. We just shouldn't be prejudiced to the degree as much as we have historically, and we're starting to make a difference there. So education is one area on finance where I think some difference can be made. We talked briefly about transportation in terms of having the capital improvement projects list become a mandatory prescription against how money is distributed by the commission. And then you've got various capital projects throughout my district that I think are important and that I think have merit from a state policy perspective. For instance, the Waddell Mariculture Center. I mean, I look at what they do there, and I look at the technology they're developing in terms of restocking and fisheries and maintaining the ecosystem. I just see that as being a hidden jewel.